Office rivalry, an enemies to lovers, romance story. The first encounter, Emma Rodriguez adjusted her navy blazer for the third time in 5 minutes as she walked through the sleek corridors of Tech Vibe Solutions. At 28, she had landed the position of marketing director at Austin's most promising startup, and today was her first day. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with determination. She hadn't worked 12-hour days for the past 5 years to waste this opportunity. "Emma, so good to see you here," said Sarah Chen, the CEO, with a warm smile. "Come on, I want to introduce you to the leadership team. We have our weekly meeting in 10 minutes. They entered the conference room where several executives were already seated around an impressive glass table. Emma greeted each one, memorizing names and titles with the precision that had gotten her to the top of her profession. Everything was going perfectly until the door opened again. "Sorry I'm late, folks." The California client decided they needed a last-minute call, said a confident male voice. Emma turned, and her eyes met those of a tall man with purposefully tousled brown hair and a smile that probably melted hearts all over Austin. He wore a light blue shirt with rolled-up sleeves, showing tanned forearms, and his presence filled the room with an almost palpable energy. "Emma, this is Jake Thompson, our sales director," Sarah introduced. "Jake, Emma Rodriguez, our new marketing director." Jake extended his hand with that devastating smile. "Welcome to Tech Vibe, Emma. Hope you're ready for the fast pace around here." There was something in the way he said it, not exactly condescending, but definitely challenging. Emma shook his hand firmly, noticing how warm and rough it was. "I believe I can keep up, Jake." "Perfect," Sarah interrupted, "because you two are going to be working very closely together. Marketing and sales need to be completely aligned if we want to close our Series B next quarter." Throughout the entire meeting, Emma felt Jake's eyes on her. When she presented her initial marketing strategy, he asked pointed questions that clearly tested her knowledge. When it was his turn to present sales numbers, Emma fired back with equally sharp questions about lead quality versus quantity. "Interesting perspective," Jake said when Emma suggested they should focus on more qualified leads instead of gross volume. "But in the real world, Emma, numbers drive business. Quality is a luxury startups can't afford." "In the real world, Jake?" Emma replied with an icy smile. "Marketing campaigns wasting money on bad leads is exactly why startups fail." The tension in the room was almost tangible. Sarah cleared her throat. "Well, it's obvious you both bring valuable perspectives. I'm sure you'll find middle ground." When the meeting ended, Emma was packing her materials when Jake approached. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" They stepped into the hallway. Jake crossed his arms, and Emma noticed how it accentuated his biceps. "Focus, Emma. Look, I know you're new here, so I'll give you a free tip," Jake said, his voice low but clear. "I built this company's sales department from scratch. My methods work. Suggesting I'm wasting resources in front of the CEO, not exactly strategic." Emma stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "And I'll give you a free tip, Jake. I didn't get this position by being delicate or political. If you're doing something that hurts the company, I'll speak up about it, CEO present or not." For a moment, they stared at each other in silence. Emma could feel the heat emanating from Jake's body, could see the small scars on his hands that suggested he hadn't always worked in offices. There was something dangerously attractive about how he challenged her, about how he didn't back down from her assertiveness. "How interesting," Jake murmured, his dark eyes scanning her face. "Welcome to Tech Vibe, Emma Rodriguez. Something tells me things just got a lot more interesting around here." He walked away, leaving Emma alone in the hallway, her heart beating faster than she'd like to admit. She had faced intimidating CEOs, skeptical investors, and competitive colleagues throughout her career. But something about Jake Thompson made her feel like she was stepping into completely uncharted territory. And the most disturbing part? Part of her was eager to explore that territory. The war escalates. 3 weeks later, the war had officially begun. Emma arrived at the office at 7:30 every morning, but Jake was already there, drinking his black coffee and reviewing reports. When she stayed until 8 p.m. working on campaigns, his office lights were still on. It was like they were in a silent competition to see who was more dedicated, more indispensable. "Your conversion numbers are terrible this month," Emma said, dropping a stack of reports on Jake's desk unceremoniously. It was a Thursday morning, and she had spent the previous night analyzing data. "We're spending 40% more on customer acquisition, but closing 15% fewer deals." Jake looked up from his emails, his hair even more disheveled than usual. There were dark circles under his eyes, and Emma wondered if he had slept in the office again. "Good morning to you too, Emma, and your numbers are wrong?" "Wrong?" Emma crossed her arms. She had triple-checked. "Jake, I literally pulled this data last night straight from the system. And I'm telling you they're wrong because you're not considering the complete pipeline." Jake stood up, moving to the whiteboard on his wall. Even irritated, Emma couldn't help but notice how his shirt fitted perfectly across his shoulders when he stretched to write. "See, when you only look at immediate conversions, you're missing the big picture." He began drawing a complex diagram, explaining how some leads took months to mature. Emma moved closer, pretending she needed to see the numbers better, but actually noticing how Jake smelled, a mixture of expensive soap and something indefinably masculine that made her want to breathe deeper. "This is ridiculous," she said, forcing herself to focus on his flawed logic instead of the heat she felt whenever they were close. "You're essentially telling me to trust hypothetical future conversions instead of real data we have now. I'm telling you that marketing and sales operate on different timelines, and maybe if you understood our process, maybe if you guys followed a documented process instead of relying on your Texan charm." "My Texan charm?" Jake turned, one eyebrow raised and an annoyingly sexy smile on his lips. "Emma, did you just admit you think I have charm?" Emma felt her cheeks heat up. "I said charm in the most ironic way possible, Jake." "Of course you did." He stepped closer, and Emma had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "And I suppose you studying me since that Monday meeting was also ironic?" "I wasn't," Emma started, but knew she was lying. She had noticed everything about Jake in recent weeks. How he always ordered the turkey sandwich from the corner food truck. How he genuinely laughed at the IT team's bad jokes. How his eyes lit up when he talked about closing a difficult deal. "Emma, can I speak with you?" Sarah's voice appeared at the door, saving Emma from having to finish that sentence. "In my office, please. Jake, you too." They followed Sarah in tense silence. The CEO's office overlooked downtown Austin, and Emma tried to focus on the distant buildings instead of how she could feel Jake walking behind her. "Sit down," Sarah said, her tone more serious than usual. "We've had some feedback from other departments about the dynamic between you two." Emma and Jake exchanged glances. "What kind of feedback?" Emma asked. "The kind that suggests you're more interested in competing with each other than working for the company's benefit." Sarah sat down, looking directly at them. "Look, I hired you both because you're the best at what you do, but if you can't work together, one of you will have to go." The silence was deafening. Emma felt her stomach drop. She had worked too hard to get this position, and the idea of losing it because of an inflated male ego was unacceptable. "With all due respect, Sarah," Jake said finally, "Emma and I may have different approaches, but we're both committed to the company's success." "Different approaches?" Sarah laughed, but it wasn't an amused sound. "You're in a corporate Cold War, and it's affecting everyone's morale. So here's what's going to happen. You have 2 weeks to present an integrated marketing and sales strategy for next quarter. Together. If you can prove you can collaborate, great. If not..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. The message was clear. After they left Sarah's Office, Emma and Jake stood in the hallway in uncomfortable silence. Emma was furious with herself for letting the situation get to this point, with Jake for being so impossible, and with the universe for making her professional life so complicated. "Well," Jake said eventually, "looks like we're partners now." Emma stared at him. "Let's get one thing clear, Jake. I'm not going to lose my job because of your inability to accept constructive input. So you can swallow your pride and work with me, or you can start updating your LinkedIn." Jake smiled, and this time there was no charm in it, just pure determination. "Emma, sweetheart, you clearly don't know me yet. I never back down from a challenge." "Great," Emma shot back, "because neither do I." As she walked back to her office, Emma couldn't help but think she had just declared war on the most frustrating and disturbingly attractive man she'd ever met. And for some reason, she was looking forward to the battle. First sign of vulnerability. It was 9:47 on a Friday morning when Emma finally found Jake in the office kitchen, standing in front of the coffee machine with a defeated expression. She had been looking for him for an hour to discuss the integrated strategy Sarah had demanded, but his office was empty and his assistant said he had stepped out for a meeting. Clearly, that meeting was with a cup of industrial-grade bad coffee. "Caffeine troubles?" Emma asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. They had declared a tense truce since the conversation with Sarah 3 days ago, but they were still walking on eggshells around each other. Jake turned, and Emma was surprised to see how tired he looked. Not just tired, exhausted. There were more lines around his eyes than she had noticed before, and his usually impeccable shirt was wrinkled like he had slept in it. "The machine's broken," he said simply, "and I really need coffee right now." Emma studied his face. In all their verbal battles over the past weeks, she had never seen Jake look vulnerable. It was unsettling and inexplicably touching. "Come on," she said, grabbing her purse. "I know a place." Jake hesitated. "Emma, we have that presentation." "Jake." She interrupted him, her voice softer than intended. "You look like a zombie. 5 minutes of fresh air and real coffee won't kill our productivity." To her surprise, he didn't argue. They walked in silence to the small cafe around the corner that Emma had discovered in her second week. It was one of those authentically Texan places with exposed brick walls, hanging plants, and a tattooed barista who made art in every latte. "2 black coffees large," Jake said when they reached the counter. "Actually," Emma interjected, "1 large black coffee and a cortado with oat milk." The barista nodded and began working. Jake looked at her curiously. "Cortado with oat milk? Doesn't match your personality." "And what exactly is my personality?" Emma asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. Direct, no nonsense. "Black." Coffee seemed appropriate. Emma laughed, and it was a genuine sound for the first time in weeks. "Jake, I'm Latina raised by an Italian grandmother. I practically came out of the womb knowing the difference between cappuccino and macchiato. Black coffee is efficient, but life's too short for bad coffee." They found a small table by the window. Jake took a sip of his coffee and closed his eyes, as if savoring more than just caffeine. "God, this is so much better." "Rough night?" Emma asked before she could censor herself. Jake looked at her for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "My younger sister is going through a messy divorce. She called me at 2 a.m. in a panic because her ex is trying to get full custody of the kids." Emma felt something loosen in her chest. "That's terrible. Is she okay?" Now she is. Or at least better than she was at 2 a.m. Jake ran his hand through his hair, messing it up even more. "Madison's always been the emotionally fragile one in the family, you know? Our parents died when she was 16, so I kind of became her. Protector by default." The information hit Emma like a punch. She had assumed Jake was just another privileged executive who had everything handed to him in life. The reality that he had raised a teenage sister while building his own career completely changed her perspective on him. "How old were you?" she asked softly. 23, fresh out of college, first real job, and suddenly responsible for a grieving 16-year-old girl. Jake smiled, but there was no joy in it. "Not exactly what you expect when you're starting. Your career." Emma felt an unexpected wave of admiration. "How did you manage? Lots of sleepless nights, lots of bad coffee, and pure stubbornness." Jake looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Madison always says she inherited all the emotional parts of the family, and I inherited all the stubborn parts." "That would explain a lot about you," Emma said, and was surprised when Jake laughed genuinely. "Fair point. What about you? Any family keeping you up at night worrying?" Emma hesitated. She never talked about her family at work. She had learned early that revealing too much about your personal life could be used against you in competitive corporate environments. But something about Jake's honesty made her want to reciprocate. "My parents immigrated from Mexico when I was 5. My dad works construction, my mom cleans houses. They sacrificed everything to give me opportunities they never had." She turned her cup between her hands. "The pressure not to waste those sacrifices can be intense." "That's why you work so late," Jake observed. "It wasn't a question. Part of it, and part because I really love what I do." Emma looked at him directly. "Contrary to popular belief, I don't stay at the office late just to annoy you." "Shame," Jake said with a mischievous smile that made Emma's stomach do a little flip. "And here I thought I was special." For a moment, they looked at each other in silence, and Emma felt something fundamental shifting between them. The tension was still there, but it was different now. Less hostile. More charged. "We should get back," she said finally, breaking the moment. "Yes, we should." But neither of them moved immediately. It was as if they both knew something had changed at that small cafe table, and going back to the office would mean having to figure out what to do with this new dynamic. When they finally got up to leave, Jake held the door for Emma. "Thank you," he said, and she knew he wasn't just talking about the coffee. "You're welcome," she replied, and for the first time since they'd met, the smile she gave him was completely genuine. As they walked back to the office, Emma couldn't help but notice that Jake no longer seemed like an adversary. He seemed like a complex, hard-working man who carried heavy responsibilities with a grace she was beginning to admire, and that terrified her more than any workplace rival ever could. Forced to work together. "All right, let's do this right," Emma said, spreading documents across the conference table. It was Monday morning, and they had exactly 9 days to create the integrated strategy Sarah had demanded. "We need to divide this logically. Marketing focuses on lead generation and branding. Sales focuses on conversion and customer relationships." Jake, who was on the other side of the table with his own set of papers, raised an eyebrow. "Emma, if it were that simple, we wouldn't be in this situation. The problem is exactly that our departments are operating in silos." He was right, and Emma hated when he was right. "Okay, so what's your brilliant proposal? How about we start by mapping the entire customer journey from first touchpoint to contract renewal?" Jake stood up and went to the whiteboard. "And then we identify where marketing and sales overlap, where there are gaps, and where we're duplicating efforts." Emma watched as he drew a complex diagram. His movements were confident and precise, and she noticed how expressive his hands were when he explained concepts. "Focus, Emma. This actually makes sense," she admitted reluctantly. "But we need real data, not just theories." "Agreed. How about we spend the morning gathering data and the afternoon analyzing?" They spent the next 2 hours at their respective computers, compiling reports, metrics, and analyses. Emma was so absorbed in her customer acquisition cost spreadsheet that she didn't notice when Jake moved to stand behind her chair until she felt his warm breath on her neck. "Are these Q2 numbers right?" he asked, pointing at her screen. Emma turned quickly, not realizing he was so close. Their faces were inches apart, and for a moment that felt eternal. Neither moved. Emma could see small golden flecks in Jake's brown eyes, could feel the heat emanating from his body, could smell the subtle scent of his aftershave. Yes, they're right, she managed to say, her voice coming out huskier than intended. Jake studied her for a moment, his eyes briefly moving to her lips before returning to her eyes. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. Great. I'll get more. Coffee. You want anything? Coffee would be perfect, Emma replied, her heart still beating irregularly. When Jake left the room, Emma allowed herself a moment to recompose. What was happening to her? She was a professional, not a teenager with raging hormones. But there was something about Jake that made her forget all her carefully constructed defenses. He returned with 2 cups from the executive floor's premium coffee machine, clearly an upgrade from the industrial swill they usually drank. Thought, "You deserved something better after yesterday," he said casually. "Thank you." Emma took a sip and sighed with satisfaction. Much better. They returned to work, but now there was a different energy in the room. Less antagonistic, more collaborative. When Emma suggested a change in pricing strategy, Jake actually considered it instead of automatically pushing back. When Jake proposed a new lead handoff process, Emma built on the idea instead of finding flaws. "You know," Jake said around 3 p.m., stretching in his chair, "this is actually working." "What's working?" Emma asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. "Us. Working together. Who would have thought?" He smiled, and this time there was no sarcasm in it. Maybe Sarah was right about us having complementary perspectives. Emma felt warmth spreading through her chest. "Don't get used to it, Thompson. I still think your sales techniques are sometimes questionable. And I still think your marketing budgets are too conservative," Jake shot back. "But maybe we can work with these differences." They continued working late into the evening, ordering Chinese food and spreading documents across the entire conference table. Around 8 p.m., Emma was typing furiously when she felt Jake approach again. "Emma," he said softly, "you've been typing the same line for 5 minutes." She stopped and looked at the screen. He was right. "Damn. I think my brain shut off. Let's call it a day." We made incredible progress. Emma looked around the room. They really had made progress. The whiteboard was covered with diagrams, the table was full of strategy drafts, and for the first time since they started working together, she felt like they were actually building something. "Jake," she said, as they were packing up their materials, "thank you for today, for actually listening to my ideas." "Thank you for having ideas worth listening to," he replied. And there was something in his voice that made Emma look at him quickly. They stared at each other for a moment, and Emma felt that familiar tension building between them again. But this time, it didn't feel antagonistic. It felt like something completely different, something that made her want to step closer instead of away. She began. "Yes, you should," Jake agreed, but neither of them moved. Finally, Emma forced herself to break the moment. "See you tomorrow?" "Same time?" "Same time." As Emma drove home that night, she couldn't stop thinking about how the dynamic between her and Jake had changed. Somewhere between spreadsheets and flowcharts, they had stopped being adversaries and started being, what? Partners? Friends? Or something more dangerous? She sighed and turned up the radio, trying to push those thoughts away. She had a job to do and a career to protect. She couldn't afford to be distracted by a pair of brown eyes and a devastating smile, even if those eyes and that smile were starting to appear in her dreams. Romantic tension awakens. Wednesday, Emma arrived at the office to find a cortado with oat milk waiting on her desk, still steaming. Next to it was a small note in Jake's messy handwriting. to fuel the brilliant brain that's saving our jobs. Emma felt an involuntary smile spreading across her face before she could control it. It was just coffee, she told herself. A professional gesture, nothing more. But when she arrived at the conference room and found Jake already working, wearing a blue shirt that brought out his eyes in an unfair way, she couldn't ignore how her heart accelerated. "Thanks for the coffee," she said, trying to sound casual. "Thought you could use the fuel. We have a lot to do today." Jake looked at her, and there was something in his expression that made her hesitate. "Emma, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why? Marketing? I mean, you clearly have the brain for anything. Could have been a lawyer, doctor, CEO. Why did you choose marketing?" The question caught her off guard. "Do you really want to know, or are you just making conversation?" "I really want to know." Emma sat down, considering how to answer. "When I was 12, my family was going through financial difficulties. My dad had gotten injured at work and couldn't work for a few months. One night, I was watching TV with my mom when a Coca-Cola commercial came on. You know, one of those that makes you feel like soda is the key to world happiness." Jake nodded, clearly paying attention. "My mom started crying. I asked why, and she said, 'Mija, they make it look like Coca-Cola solves all problems, but it can't pay our bills.' That's when I understood the power of marketing, how it can make people want things, feel things, believe in things." Emma paused, fidgeting with her pen. "I decided I wanted to use that power for something more meaningful than just selling soda." "And do you do that here? Something meaningful?" "I believe so. We're helping small businesses automate processes, grow, create jobs. Maybe we're not saving the world, but we're making a difference." She looked at him directly. "What about you? Why sales?" Jake laughed, but there was a note of self-deprecation in it. "Much less noble story. I was good at it since I was a teenager, convinced half my high school class to buy questionable used cars from a lot I worked at on weekends. I discovered I had a talent for understanding what people want and how to give it to them." "That's more meaningful than you think," Emma said. "Sales, at its core, is about human connection, about understanding needs and finding solutions." Jake looked at her with an expression she couldn't identify. "Do you always see the best in things like that?" "Not always. But usually, yes." They worked in comfortable silence for the next few minutes. But Emma was hyper-aware of Jake's presence. The way he drummed his fingers when he was thinking. How he bit his lower lip when he was concentrating. How his eyes lit up when he had an idea. "Emma," Jake said suddenly, "have you ever thought that maybe our initial problem wasn't just different methodologies?" "What do you mean?" Jake paused what he was doing and turned to face her completely. "I mean that maybe we started competing because there was an attraction neither of us knew how to handle." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma felt her face heat up and her heart race. "Jake, you don't have to say anything," he said quickly. I just wanted to put it out there, because it's affecting my ability to think clearly when you're around." Emma stared at him, trying to process his words. "You're saying you were rude to me because you're attracted to me?" "I'm saying I was defensive because you affect me in a way I never expected in a work environment." Jake ran his hand through his hair. "Emma, you're brilliant, passionate, funny when you're not trying to kill me, and you have these eyes that make me completely forget what I was talking about." Emma felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Jake." "And that first day, when you challenged me in front of everyone, half of me was irritated, and the other half was intrigued, impressed, maybe a little attracted to the woman who didn't back down." Emma stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backward. "We can't do this." "Do what? This?" She gestured between them. "Flirt, or admit attraction, or whatever's happening here. We work together, Jake. Sarah already gave us an ultimatum. If we seem unprofessional now, "You're right," Jake said, but he didn't move away. Instead, he stood up too, and suddenly, they were standing half a meter apart. "You're absolutely right, and I should have kept my mouth shut." "You should have," Emma agreed, but her voice came out as a whisper. "But since I didn't..." Jake stepped closer. "Are you going to pretend you don't feel anything? That there's nothing happening here?" Emma could feel the heat emanating from his body, could see the small lines around his eyes that appeared when he smiled. "Jake, we can't..." "I know," he said softly. "Believe me, I know all the reasons why this is a terrible idea." But he leaned slightly forward, and Emma found herself being pulled like he was a magnet for a terrifying and thrilling moment. She thought he was going to kiss her right there in the conference room in the middle of a workday. Then the door opened. "Jake, do you have that report for..." The voice stopped abruptly when Marcus from the finance department appeared in the doorway and found Emma and Jake standing very close together, looking guilty. "The report," Jake said, clearing his throat and stepping back quickly. "Yes, it's on my desk. I'll get it to you in 5 minutes." "Right. Sorry to interrupt," Marcus said, clearly realizing he had interrupted something, and closed the door. Emma and Jake looked at each other, the reality of the situation hitting them completely. They had almost... in the office, during work hours. "We're idiots," Emma said finally. "Complete idiots," Jake agreed. "This can't happen again. Definitely not." But even as they said the words, neither could stop looking at the other's lips. Emma forced herself to return to her chair and open her laptop. "We have work to do." "Yes, we do." But as they spent the rest of the day working on their presentation, the tension between them was almost palpable. And Emma couldn't stop wondering what would have happened if Marcus hadn't shown up. The misunderstanding. Friday morning, Emma arrived at the office determined to keep things strictly professional. She had spent the entire night replaying the almost kiss in the conference room and had come to the conclusion that Jake Thompson was a distraction she simply couldn't afford to have. She was organizing her materials for the final presentation when she heard voices coming from Jake's office. The door was ajar, and she could clearly hear his phone conversation. "No, Brad. I guarantee I have everything under control," Jake was saying, his voice low but carrying easily through the silent hallway. "The new marketing director? No, she won't be a problem." Emma stopped, her hand freezing over the papers. "I know how to handle ambitious women," Jake continued, and Emma could hear the smile in his voice. "A few sweet words, a little charm, and soon she's eating out of my hand. Trust me. By the end of next week, she'll be agreeing with everything I propose." Emma's blood turned to ice. She moved closer to the door, unable to believe what she was hearing. "The integrated strategy? It's basically my sales strategy with some fancy marketing words thrown on top. Emma thinks she's collaborating, but I'm just letting her think her ideas matter." Emma felt like she had been punched in the stomach. Every conversation they'd had, every moment of vulnerability she had shared, every second of that almost kiss, had it all been manipulation? "Trust me, Brad," Jake laughed. "I learned from the best. You taught me that in the business world you use every tool available. And if one of those tools is making a pretty woman feel special, well, sacrifices have to be made." Emma backed away from the door as if she had been burned. Her hands were shaking as she returned to her desk, trying to process what she had just heard. Jake had been playing her from the beginning. All those confidences about his sister, about his dead parents, about being attracted to her. It had all been an elaborate lie to gain her trust. She sat heavily in her chair, feeling simultaneously furious and humiliated. How had she been so naive? How had she let Jake Thompson, of all people, get past her defenses so easily? "Emma!" Jake's voice appeared behind her, and she turned to see him walking toward her with a warm smile that now seemed completely fake. Ready to finalize our presentation? Sure, Emma replied, her voice cold enough to freeze hell. Jake stopped, clearly noticing her change in tone. Everything okay? Perfect. Emma stood up, gathering her materials with jerky movements. Let's just get this over with. In the conference room, Emma sat on the opposite side of the table from Jake and opened her laptop with more force than necessary. Jake watched her with growing confusion. Emma, what happened? Yesterday we were fine, and today you're treating me like I kicked your dog. I don't know what you're talking about, Emma said without looking up from her screen. I'm just focused on finishing our project so we can get back to our normal jobs. Our normal jobs? Emma, I thought we had agreed that working together was going well. Emma finally looked at him, and the intensity in her eyes made him step back. Going well for whom, Jake? For you, who got exactly what you wanted? Or for me, who was stupid enough to believe you actually changed? What are you talking about? Jake looked genuinely confused, which only irritated Emma more. He was a better actor than she had thought. Forget it. Let's just finish the presentation. Emma returned her attention to the computer. You can present the sales part, I'll present the marketing part, and we'll pretend we're a united team for 15 minutes. Emma, seriously, I don't understand. Jake. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. Stop. Just stop pretending you care about my opinion or what I think. We both know this is just business for you. They worked in tense silence for the next 2 hours, communicating only when absolutely necessary. Jake tried several times to start a conversation, but Emma cut him off each time with short, professional responses. When they finished, their presentation was technically impeccable, but the chemistry they had developed over the week had completely evaporated. It was like they were back to day one, only worse because now Emma knew exactly how manipulative Jake could be. Emma, Jake said when she was packing up her materials, can I take you to lunch? Clearly something happened. And I'd like to... I have plans, Emma lied, not trusting herself not to explode if she had to spend more time alone with him. Okay, how about after work? We could... Jake. Emma turned to face him, and there was something in her expression that made him stop talking immediately. I don't know what game you're playing, but it's over. We did what Sarah asked. Now we can go back to what we were before, professional colleagues who barely tolerate each other. She left the room before he could respond, leaving Jake alone, and completely perplexed about what had just happened. The woman who had almost kissed him yesterday had disappeared, replaced by the cold, hostile version he thought he had left in the past, and he had no idea why. As Emma walked back to her office, she forced herself not to look back. She had made the mistake of trusting Jake Thompson once. She wouldn't do it again, even if a small part of her, a part she was determined to ignore, wished the conversation she had heard was a misunderstanding. But she knew better than that. In the corporate world, people like Jake always had an angle, and she had been stupid enough to think it could be different. Never again. Revelations and growth, Jake spent the entire weekend trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Monday morning, he arrived at the office determined to find out why Emma had gone back to treating him like an enemy. Their presentation was on Wednesday, and if they couldn't resolve their differences, it would be a disaster. He found her in the kitchen, making coffee with mechanical movements. She didn't even look up when he entered. Emma, he said softly, we need to talk. About what? Our presentation. Is ready? There's nothing to discuss? There is. About why you're acting like I did something terrible when I actually have no idea what happened. Emma finally looked at him, and Jake was surprised to see pain in her eyes before she quickly masked it with anger. You're really going to pretend you don't know? Emma, I swear on everything that's sacred, I don't know what you're talking about. For a moment, she just studied him. Then she sighed, as if she was too tired to maintain the facade. I heard your phone conversation Friday morning. Jake frowned. What phone conversation? With Brad. About how you were manipulating me, about how you were using charm to make me agree with your ideas, about how our integrated strategy was just your strategy with fancy marketing words. Jake's stomach dropped. Emma? About how you learned that in the business world, you use every tool available, including making pretty women feel special. Her voice was controlled, but Jake could see her hands trembling slightly. So please, spare me the confused performance. Jake ran his hand over his face, understanding completely now. Emma, you need to let me explain. There's nothing to explain. I heard very clearly. No, you didn't. Jake stepped closer, ignoring when she backed away. You heard half of a conversation and drew the wrong conclusion. Jake, Brad is my mentor from when I started in corporate life 10 years ago. He taught me some very questionable lessons about how to win in the workplace. Jake stared at her intensely. And Friday morning, he was congratulating me for managing to control you, assuming I was using the old tactics he taught me. Emma hesitated, and Jake saw a crack in her armor. I was agreeing with him because... Jake paused, running his hand through his hair in frustration. Because it's easier to let Brad think I'm still the same manipulative idiot from 10 years ago than to explain that I've changed, that you changed me. I didn't change you, Emma said, but her voice had lost some of its hostility. You did. Jake stepped closer. Emma, 3 weeks ago, I really would have tried to manipulate you. I would have used charm and politics and all the dirty tricks I learned to get what I wanted. But working with you showed me there's a better way. Emma stared at him, and Jake could see she was fighting internally. You showed me that real collaboration works better than manipulation, that respecting someone's ideas produces better results than diminishing them, that being honest about vulnerabilities builds stronger trust than any facade. Jake paused. You showed me what kind of man I want to be, Emma, and that man is much better than the idiot Brad was praising. How can I know this isn't just another manipulation? Emma asked, but her voice was softer now. Jake pulled out his phone. Call Brad, now. Ask him exactly what I said about you. Emma stared at him in surprise. What? Brad Morrison, Parker and Associates. He's in my contacts. Call him and ask about our Friday conversation. Jake held out the phone. If I'm lying, you'll know in 2 minutes. Emma looked at the phone, then at Jake. Slowly, she took the device and dialed the number. Jake could vaguely hear Brad's voice on the other end when he answered. Hi, Mr. Morrison. This is Emma Rodriguez from Tech Vibe. I work with Jake Thompson. Yes, he gave me your number. Actually, I was calling about the conversation you had Friday about me. Jake watched Emma's face as she listened. He saw confusion, then surprise, then something that looked like regret. I see. No, that's fine. Thank you for clarifying. Yes, I'll talk to him. She hung up and stared at the phone for a long moment. What did he say? Jake asked, though he already knew. He said... Emma paused, clearly embarrassed. He said you spent most of the conversation talking about how smart and talented I was and how you were learning a lot working with me. He said you seemed different, more mature. Jake nodded. And about the manipulation part? He said he was the one who assumed you were manipulating me and that you just didn't correct him. Emma finally looked up to meet his eyes. He said, when he mentioned your old tactics, you changed the subject quickly. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the misunderstanding hanging between them. Emma, Jake said softly, everything I told you about my sister, about my parents, about how I feel about you, it was all true. I would never lie about those things. Emma closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were shining with unshed tears. I'm sorry. I assumed the worst and didn't even give you a chance to explain. You assumed the worst because you've been hurt before, Jake observed. Someone manipulated you in the past? Emma laughed bitterly. My ex-boss at my previous job, he spent months making me think we were partners, that he valued my ideas. Then I found out he was plagiarizing my work and making me look incompetent to his superiors. She shook her head. When I heard your conversation, it was like reliving all of that again. Jake felt a wave of anger toward a man he had never met. What an asshole. Yeah. Well, I learned my lesson about trusting charming male colleagues. Emma, Jake took another step, now close enough to touch her face if he wanted. I'm not him, and I promise I'll never give you reason to doubt that. Emma studied him for a long moment. How can I be sure? Because, Jake said, his voice low and intense. I'm completely in love with you, and men in love don't manipulate the women they love. They protect them. The silence that followed was absolute. Emma's eyes widened, clearly not expecting that confession. Jake! You don't have to say anything, he said quickly. I know we're still figuring this out, and I know our work situation complicates everything. I just wanted you to know that my feelings are real. Emma stared at him for a long moment, and Jake could see a war happening in her eyes. Finally, she sighed. We really are a disaster, aren't we? Jake smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he had given in days. The most beautiful disaster I've ever seen, and for the first time. Since Friday, Emma smiled back. The turning point. The presentation was an absolute success. Emma and Jake presented as a truly integrated team, their ideas flowing seamlessly from one to the other, building and improving their partners' concepts. Sarah and the rest of the leadership team were visibly impressed not just with the strategy, but with the obvious chemistry between them. Excellent work, you two, Sarah said after all the other executives had left the room. You didn't just create a brilliant strategy, but proved you can work together effectively. I'm impressed. Emma and Jake exchanged glances. The tension from the past few days had transformed into something different, a real partnership based on mutual respect and, though neither would admit it openly, growing feelings that went far beyond professional. Actually, Sarah continued, I want you to keep working together on implementing this strategy. I'm going to create a position for co-directors of revenue operations. Would you be interested? Emma felt her heart race. Working even closer with Jake? After everything that had happened between them? That would be great, Jake said, looking at Emma. If Emma agrees, of course. Emma paused, looking between Sarah and Jake. Can I have some time to think about it? Of course. Give me an answer by the end of the week. After Sarah left, Emma and Jake were alone in the conference room. The same room where they had almost kissed just a few days ago. Emma, Jake said softly, about Sarah's offer. Jake, I need to tell you something. Emma turned to face him completely. These past few days working with you, discovering who you really are, it's been incredible. And terrifying. Terrifying? Emma sighed, walking to the window overlooking downtown Austin. 3 years ago, I promised myself I would never let personal feelings interfere with my work again. And then you showed up with your impossible eyes and devastating smile and frustrating intelligence, and suddenly I'm questioning all the rules I made to protect myself. Jake approached, stopping behind her. Emma, you said you're in love with me, she continued, without turning around. And the truth is, I am too. In love with you. With the man who works late to help his sister. With the professional who admits when he's wrong. With the man who brought me coffee every morning this week, even when I was being horrible to you. Jake gently placed his hands on her shoulders. So what's the problem? Emma finally turned, and Jake could see tears in her eyes. The problem is, I don't know how to do this. How to love someone and work with them, and not lose everything if it goes wrong. Emma, Jake said, his hands moving up to gently hold her face. Do you think I know? Do you think I've been in this situation before? Haven't you? Never. I've never fallen in love with a coworker. I've never fallen in love with someone who challenges me intellectually every day. I've never fallen in love with someone who makes me want to be a better person." Jake paused, his thumbs gently caressing her cheeks. "I'm just as scared as you are, Emma. But I'm more scared of the idea of not trying." Emma closed her eyes, leaning slightly into his touch. "What if we ruin everything? Our work partnership, our friendship, everything?" "What if we don't?" Jake softly countered. "What if we're exactly what each other needs, both professionally and personally?" Emma opened her eyes and found Jake looking at her with an intensity that made her heart stop. "Jake, Emma, can I kiss you? Please? Because if I don't kiss you, now, I think I'm going to go crazy." Instead of answering, Emma leaned forward, closing the distance between them. When their lips met, it was like all the weeks of tension and conflict and misunderstandings transformed into something perfect and inevitable. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, as if both still couldn't believe it was finally happening. Then Emma sighed against Jake's lips, and he deepened the kiss, his hands moving to her hair as she pressed closer. When they finally separated, both were breathless. "Wow," Emma whispered. "Yeah, wow," Jake agreed, his forehead resting against hers. "So, does this mean you'll accept the position with Sarah?" Emma laughed, and it was a genuinely happy sound. "It means I'll try. We'll try. Together? Together." Jake smiled, and it was the most radiant smile Emma had ever seen. "Can I kiss you again?" "You can kiss me whenever you want," Emma replied, already leaning toward him again. And when their lips met for the second time, Emma knew she had found something worth all the risks in the world. Jake Thompson was right. They were a beautiful disaster, but they were each other's disaster, and that made all the difference. Outside the conference room, Sarah walked past the hallway and smiled, seeing the two silhouettes embraced against the window. She had hoped those two would figure out what everyone in the office had known for weeks. Sometimes the best business partnerships were born from the most unexpected places. Confession and resolution. 6 months later, Emma stood in front of the women's restroom mirror, adjusting her red blazer for the 5th time. It was the night of the company's annual dinner, and for some reason, she was more nervous than she had been for any important presentation. "You okay?" asked Lisa from accounting, appearing next to her in the mirror. "Perfect," Emma replied, but her voice came out a little higher than intended. "This wouldn't have anything to do with the fact that you and Jake are finally going to make things official tonight, would it?" Emma turned, surprised. "How did you—" Lisa laughed. "Emma, you two aren't exactly subtle. Every time you're in the same room, the sexual tension is almost palpable. And in the past few weeks, you've both had this, we're planning something energy that's impossible to ignore." Emma sighed. "Is it that obvious? To anyone with eyes? Absolutely." Lisa smiled. "But don't worry, everyone's rooting for you two, especially after how you completely transformed the dynamic between marketing and sales." It was true. In the past 6 months, working as co-directors of revenue operations, Emma and Jake had not only implemented their integrated strategy, but refined and expanded it. The company's numbers were better than ever, and the work environment had become more collaborative and less competitive. Of course, it also helped that they were completely in love. "You'll be fine," Lisa said, patting Emma's arm. "And if Jake is stupid enough to mess this up, all of us on the women's team will make his life hell." Emma laughed genuinely for the first time in days. "Thanks. I think I needed that." When she returned to the main ballroom of the hotel, Emma immediately searched for Jake in the crowd. She found him near the bar, talking with some colleagues, and her heart still raced like it always did when she saw him. He was wearing a navy blue tuxedo that brought out his eyes and showed his athletic build in a way that should be illegal. As if sensing her gaze, Jake turned and found her across the room. The smile that spread across his face was just for her, and Emma felt that familiar wave of warmth and affection he always provoked. He excused himself from his colleagues and walked to her, his eyes never leaving hers. "You look stunning," he said when he got close enough, his voice low and intimate despite the crowd around them. "You don't look bad yourself," Emma replied, adjusting his tie in a gesture that had become familiar over the past months. "Can I steal you for a few minutes?" Jake asked. "There's something I want to show you." Emma nodded, letting him guide her out of the main ballroom and onto a small terrace that overlooked downtown Austin. The city stretched below them, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. "Jake," Emma began, "about what we're going to announce. Tonight—" "Emma," Jake interrupted her gently, turning to face her completely. "Before we make any announcement, there's something I need to tell you." He looked nervous, which was unusual for Jake. Emma felt a pang of anxiety. "What is it?" Jake took a deep breath. "These past 6 months, working with you, dating you, figuring out how to fit love and career together, they've been the best of my life." Emma smiled. "For me too. You made me a better person, Emma. Not just a better professional, but a better man. You taught me that vulnerability is strength, that collaboration is more powerful than competition, that true love isn't about possessing someone, but about supporting them in becoming the best version of themselves." "Jake," Emma began, but he gently placed a finger on her lips. "Let me finish, please." Jake smiled nervously. "I know it's early. I know we're still figuring out how to make this work, but to Emma's complete shock, Jake knelt down, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "Emma Rodriguez," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Will you marry me?" Emma stared at him, speechless, her heart beating so loud she was sure Jake could hear it. "Jake, are you proposing to me?" "I am," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring, a solitaire that caught the starlight. "I know it's crazy. I know we haven't been together that long, but Emma, when you know, you know. And I know I want to spend the rest of my life arguing marketing strategies with you, building businesses with you, raising children with you, growing old with you." Emma felt tears streaming down her face. "Jake, if it's too early, we can have a long engagement. If you want to keep our career separate from marriage, we can figure out how to make that work. If you want to change your last name, great. If you don't want to, that's great too. Just say yes, Emma. Say you want to try building a life with me." Emma looked at the man kneeling before her, the same man who had been her biggest professional rival just months ago, who was now her best friend, work partner, and the love of her life. She thought about all the risks, all the potential complications, all the reasons why this could go wrong. Then she thought about the alternative. A life without Jake, without their mornings making coffee together, without their passionate debates about strategies, without his gentle kisses and warm hugs and laughter that always made her smile. "Yes," she said, and then louder, more certain. "Yes, Jake Thompson, I will marry you." The smile that spread across Jake's face was brighter than all the city lights. He stood up, sliding the ring onto her finger with slightly trembling hands, and then kissed her with a passion and joy that made her feel like she was flying. When they separated, both were laughing and crying at the same time. "So," Jake said, his forehead resting against hers, "ready to announce our relationship to the company?" Emma laughed. "I think we just raised the stakes on that announcement." "A little bit," Jake agreed, and then kissed her again, because he could, because she had said yes, because they were a team now in every sense of the word. And when they returned to the dinner 20 minutes later, hand in hand and radiant, Emma didn't need to say a word. The ring on her finger and the smiles on their faces told the whole story anyone needed to know. Jake Thompson and Emma Rodriguez, rivals who became partners, partners who became lovers, and lovers who would become family. Happily ever after, a year and a half later, Emma stood in front of another mirror, but this time it was on her wedding day. The wedding dress was simple but elegant, an A-line design in cream silk that she had chosen because Jake had casually mentioned he loved how she looked in neutral tones. "Are you ready?" asked Madison, Jake's sister, who had become one of Emma's best friends over the past months. She was the maid of honor, along with Sarah, who had insisted she deserved the title for being basically a corporate Cupid. "I think so," Emma replied, though her hands were trembling slightly as she adjusted her veil. The wedding was taking place in the garden of a boutique hotel in Austin, the same hotel where Jake had proposed to Emma on the terrace. It was a small, intimate event, just close family, friends, and work colleagues who had become family over the years. "He won't be able to stop crying when he sees you," Madison said with a smile. "He was a nervous wreck this morning. Brad practically had to force him to eat breakfast." Emma smiled, thinking about nervous Jake. Over the past 18 months, they had navigated through all the challenges of a workplace relationship with a grace that surprised even themselves. They had established clear boundaries between their personal and professional lives, had been transparent with the company about their relationship, and had continued to be an incredibly effective work team. Tech Vibe had grown 300% in the past year, and much of that success was credited to the innovative marketing and sales strategy Emma and Jake had developed. They had become a Harvard Business School case study on how romantic and professional partnerships could successfully coexist. "Emma," her mother's voice appeared behind her, soft and emotional. "Mija, you look so beautiful." Emma turned to find her mother, elegant in a navy blue dress with tears in her eyes. Her father was behind her, impeccable in his rented tuxedo, looking proud and emotional. "Papa," Emma said, walking to him, "thank you for doing this." Her father, normally a man of few words, pulled her into a tight hug. "Emma, you chose a good man. He loves you the way you deserve to be loved." It was true. Over the past months, as they planned the wedding, Jake had made an effort to know and honor Emma's family and culture. He had learned basic Spanish to be able to talk with her grandparents. He had insisted the ceremony include Mexican traditions important to Emma. He had even learned to make tamales with her grandmother, though the results were questionable. "It's time," Madison announced, peeking through the door. "Jake is at the altar and looks like he's going to faint from anxiety any moment." Emma took a deep breath, took her father's arm, and walked toward her future. The garden was decorated simply but beautifully, with lights hanging between the trees and local flowers in shades of white and green. But Emma barely noticed the decoration, because her eyes immediately found Jake at the altar. He was wearing the same navy blue tuxedo from the company dinner, and when he saw her, his face lit up with a smile so radiant she felt her heart skip. She could see tears in his eyes, and that made her smile even more. The walk to the altar seemed to last forever, and just a second at the same time. When her father handed her over to Jake, he whispered, "Take care of her." "With my life," Jake replied, and Emma knew he was being completely sincere. The ceremony was perfect, personal, emotional, and full of moments that made everyone laugh and cry. When it came time for vows, Emma went first. "Jake," she began, her voice clear and strong, "2 years ago, you entered my life like a hurricane. You challenged everything I thought I knew about love, work, and how the two could coexist. You taught me that being vulnerable isn't weakness, that trusting is a choice worth making, and that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as the biggest challenges." She paused, looking directly into his eyes. "You're my best friend, my partner in everything, and the person who makes me laugh even on the worst days. I promise to love you, challenge you, support you, and probably argue with you about marketing strategies for the rest of our lives." Jake laughed through his tears, and Emma could hear soft laughter from the audience. "Emma," Jake said when it was his turn, "you showed up in my life and turned everything upside down in the best possible way. You showed me that being strong doesn't mean not needing anyone, that being smart means being willing to change your mind, and that true love is about growing together, not just being together." He took a deep breath. "You're the most incredible woman I've ever met. Brilliant, passionate, stubborn in a way that drives me crazy and makes me love you even more. I promise to honor you, support you, make you laugh, and bring you quality coffee for the rest of our lives." When they were finally declared husband and wife, the kiss they shared was soft, sweet, and full of promises for the future. The reception was as perfect as the ceremony. Emma and Jake danced their first dance to "At Last" by Etta James, lost in each other while family and friends watched with emotional smiles. "So, Mrs. Thompson," Jake whispered in her ear as they danced, "how does it feel to be married to your former workplace rival?" "Mrs. Rodriguez Thompson," Emma corrected with a smile. "And I feel like the luckiest woman in the world, even though it means having to put up with me disagreeing with you in meetings forever." Emma laughed, leaning back to look into his eyes. "Especially because of that. Our life is never going to be boring, Jake Thompson." "No," he agreed, gracefully, spinning her. "It definitely won't be." As the night continued, Emma looked around the garden filled with people they loved. Her family, who had completely accepted Jake. Jake's friends, who had welcomed her like a sister. Their work colleagues, who had become chosen family. Sarah was dancing with Madison, both laughing at something. Her parents were chatting animatedly with Jake's sister, clearly loving the chance to be in-laws. Brad, who had turned out to be much sweeter in person than over the phone, was telling embarrassing Jake stories to anyone who would listen. It was exactly as Emma had imagined it would be, chaotic, loving, perfect in its imperfection. "What are you thinking about?" Jake asked, following her gaze around the party. "I'm thinking," Emma said, returning her attention to her husband. Her husband. "That 2 years ago, if someone had told me I would marry the most annoying man in the office, I would have laughed in their face. And now? Now I know that sometimes the universe has a much better sense of humor than we do." Emma leaned in to kiss him softly. "I love you, Jake Thompson." "I love you too, Emma Rodriguez Thompson." And as they danced under the Texas stars, surrounded by the love and laughter of the most important people in their lives, Emma knew they had found something rare and precious. A partnership that worked on every level. A love that made them better people and a future full of infinite possibilities. Their days of rivalry were definitely in the past. Now they were a team for life, and it was exactly as it should be. The end. Sometimes the best loves start as the worst first impressions. And sometimes the person who challenges you the most is exactly who you need to become, who you're meant to be.